Do I have something that I want to share for you? You know what? Between you and I, really and real close, it's going to be between you, myself, and the governor. I have something special for you. Dr. Bernard Lafayette, civil rights icon and program director to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who was a special mentor of mine, I had an opportunity to sit down with him and conduct a small interview that I just can't wait to show you.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. I have a dream today.
I'm here this day, and particularly tomorrow, because we believe in institutionalizing nonviolence and helping people with their programs, and I'm just delighted to have the invitation to come and join with the Arkansas Martin Luther King State Commission. And I really look forward to meeting the young people and encouraging them and supporting the program here in Arkansas. One of the reasons I do what I'm doing is because from my early childhood experiences, I lived in segregation. I understood that the whole purpose of segregation was to get people to feel that they were inferior to other people. And also the segregation, on the other hand, was for the purpose of getting some people to feel that they were better than other people. And I never accepted that. So that was the thing that motivated me to try to do something to change the conditions. Back in Tampa, Florida, where I was born and I grew up in the South, they had segregated streetcars, and the blacks had to sit in the back. And the policy and practice was that blacks would put their money in the receptacle in the front of the streetcar, disembark, and then walk on the outside down the side of the trolley car, and then they would board through the rear door because they were going to sit in the rear. So they weren't allowed to walk down the aisle, but they had to walk outside even in the rain and inclement weather. The other thing that would happen is that we would run, because sometimes the conductor would close the door and fold up the steps and take off with their money. And on one occasion this happened with my grandmother and I, and I would run ahead. I was about 7 years old, and I would try to hold the door, because as long as you can hold the door, you can jump on the streetcar, because the steps would be down. So what happened is my grandmother fell right down in the middle of the street because the heels of a shoe got caught in the cobblestone cracks around the track. They were little, stones, and they were, had cracks in them. She was a large woman, and she fell. I mean, it was a deep fall. And here I was, a little boy, trying to pick her up with one hand and trying to hold the door with the other. And I never will. I mean, my emotional memory is just as sharp. I felt like someone had taken a sword and taken this sword and cut me in half. I was stretched out both ways. And I remember this. And there are people who say that at age 7, there's something in your life that you always remember.
Absolutely.
And my memory was this. I said to myself, when I get grown, I'm going to do something about this problem. Right. So I always had a passion for going against the grain, trying to change things. Now some people say, well, I got involved because I wanted to, make things better for my children and my grandchildren, those who will come after me. Well, to be honest, my confession is I wanted the things to be better for my grandmother. And that's why there was such an urgency. I was 7 years old, so I didn't have grandchildren in mind. But I knew what my grandmother had suffered and my mother had suffered. And I wanted to happen so fast that at least the rest of their years that they would live, they, would be able to be treated with dignity and respect, and that kind of thing. So that's what I wanted to see happen. So the moment I got a chance to get involved in this movement, when I was in Nashville as a student, sit-in started, I jumped right on it, no question about it. I said, this is what I've been looking for. When we got involved in Nashville, one of the things that I was looking at was the fact that Martin Luther King had succeeded in that movement in Montgomery. I mean, this was in Deep South. I mean, like Montgomery, Alabama, that's a little different from, say, Virginia, all right, Maryland, upstate, still in the South, but, kind of on the borders. This was Deep South, Montgomery. Of all places, the cradle of the Confederacy. This was the birthplace of the Confederacy. Okay? That was the headquarters, the capital of segregation, okay, and discrimination. Robert E. Lee, all that. So if he were able to change, okay, anything that would benefit black people in Montgomery, Alabama, we could do it anywhere, all right? So this is one of the things that I looked at. And I say, well, his method that he used, this nonviolence. Well, the first time I met Dr. Martin Luther King was in Nashville. He came to visit those of us who were involved in the sit-ins in Nashville because we subscribed to his philosophy and his methodology, and we were taught that. And we did succeed based on using his approach. And he came to a rally we had at Fisk University Gymnasium. And Martin Luther King said this. He said, I came not to bring inspiration, but I came to gain inspiration from you and the work that you've done and success. I thought that was the highest compliment any group could be paid. That's when I got to know or see Martin Luther King. Now, we shook his hand and that kind of thing. But I really got to spend some time with him that summer of 1960 in Miami, Florida, because the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, had what they call a interracial action workshop. It was at the Sir John Hotel down in Miami, Florida. And we, from Nashville, were invited to participate. And since I was from Florida and was going to be in Tampa that summer, the group selected me to go and represent the Nashville student group. And here we were, and it was 10 days, because we spent most of the time in jail. But Martin Luther King was the resource person there, and he was talking to us, etc. So there we were for the break, for lunch, and students were, after lunch would take off and go to the beach. That was a little downtime for us. They had their, towels and all bathing suits and taking off, with the girls going to the beach. And I was ready to go. And I looked around on the pool side, and there was Martin Luther King by himself in his shirt sleeve. And I looked around to see if anybody was, coming or whatever. And he was just sitting there. So I put down my towel, okay? And I went and sat with him for 2 hours. Just the two of us. Nobody even came to join us. And that's when he got to know me, because all the questions I asked him, okay? And there was such a great, opportunity for me to be sitting there with, someone who was my mentor, and I admired him so much. And most of the questions I asked him were more like theological questions and that sort of thing, etc. Because Martin Luther King's nonviolence came, out of his basic understanding of the New Testament, as well as his exposure to other philosophers like, Hegel and, Henry David Thoreau in terms of civil disobedience, and Mahatma Gandhi. And, so he was able to get a really good synthesis of all of these different philosophers. And so the kind of questions I was asking him was just absolutely, on target so far as my learning experience. Then years went by, and all of us joined in Martin Luther King's movements at different times. And I just really had an unusual opportunity to be with him. And ultimately, I had sort of a role as sort of a forerunner, because Selma, Alabama, that was one of the movements. And actually, Selma, Alabama had been crossed off the map when they assigned Charles Sherrod to Southwest Georgia, Bob Moses to Mississippi. They had sent 2 teams of SNCC workers down to Selma, and independently they came back with the same report. Can't do anything in Selma because white folks are too mean and black folks are too scared. So they had put an X through Selma, and they were looking for another state. Okay, like in Bill Hanson was sent to Arkansas. Okay, that was the place, and he was white. Okay, in fact, he was the only white field secretary we had who was sent there. Okay, and so those 3 places were the only 3 places where they, were going to send people. On the map, there was an X on Selma. There wasn't supposed to be a Selma movement. So I said, okay. He said, do you want to go take a look at it? You can do that. So I don't want to take a look at it. I'll take it. So I took Selma, Alabama, with the X on it. They weren't expecting anything. I use a scientific approach when I deal with problems. I did the research. So I knew how many people were registered to vote. I knew about a lot of details of Selma. Well, once we got the Selma movement off the ground, then Martin Luther King came in to give impetus to it. And that was the kind of role that Martin Luther King played. Same thing in Albany, all right? Same thing in Montgomery. They made him the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and he was a new boy on the block. But he was very bright, intelligent. That church he was in had a reputation because the previous minister was sort of very outspoken. So besides, nobody, had any kind of history of bad relationships with Martin Luther King. I mean, even the ministers, over a period of time, sometimes people have conflicts and, even rivalry, okay. But with him, they accepted him, new boy on the block. And he was bright, intelligent, and I mean, preachers had PhDs, pastors. That just wasn't one of the necessary things to pastor a church, you know what I'm talking about? In fact, some people might have thought it was prohibitive to have a PhD. But Martin Luther King was there. And so, back to Selma, his role, Martin Luther King's role, was to give the kind of leadership to carry it forward and made a movement. The kind of leadership that Martin Luther King had helped people take what would be a protest and make it out of a movement because of the support that he was able to bring to the situation and the way he was able to articulate the problem. It made it a movement. So the Selma movement, and then I went to Chicago, and Martin Luther King came to Chicago. And so Eventually, Martin Luther King called me, in fact, I was in Chicago, to come and work with SCLC in Atlanta. So I had the opportunity to go to Atlanta and work as Martin Luther King's program administrator, which means I managed the whole staff, the program staff, including Jesse Jackson, Jose Williams, okay, and Jim Bevel, all right, and Dorothy Cotton, okay. I was over all the program staff, all right. They were directors of projects, okay. Now, then Martin Luther King appointed me as the national coordinator for the Poor People's Campaign. Because when he recruited me and he called me, he told me, he said, I need you to come down here now because we're going to restructure the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and I need you to come down. So I said, well, could you send me a job description? He said, come down here and we'll get one together. Okay, whatever. He said, this may be my last campaign. We're going for broke. And when he said that, then I said, well, I have to go. Okay. I'd always helped him along the way. You know, anytime he needed me, I could get away from my job and go there because I was working with the Quakers, the American Friends Service Committee, and they was very supportive of the, you know, Martin Luther King's movement. And so they didn't have any problem with my, you know, participating in that. Because my job in Chicago was to create a nonviolent movement in the urban areas. How do you apply nonviolence to urban problems? That's what I was doing. So this was very much in keeping. So it's no coincidence that Martin Luther King came to Chicago. Main reason was because I was there and Jim Bevel was there, who was his director of direct action. So that meant wherever the director of direct action was going to be, that's where Martin Luther King was going to be, you know, with the direct action part. So that's the reason he really moved to Chicago. So it was an unusual opportunity to work with him. And that's how I got to know him and work very closely with him. When I was assigned to go to Selma, Alabama, I was able to operate my own way because no one was expecting anything to happen because they already had an X. My job was to take the X and do 80 degrees. And if you do 80 degrees with an X, you get a plus. So my job was to take an X and make it out a plus. Okay? So, even though it was understood I was there to help people get registered to vote because there was a lawsuit that was from the Justice Department. U.S. Justice Department had a suit against Dallas County and a number of other counties, and the lawsuit prohibited anyone from interfering with people who are trying to exercise their rights as citizens and to register and vote. So Robert Kennedy, okay, an Attorney General, had those suits filed, all right? Now, we had to get people to attempt to register to vote in order to determine whether or not they were being rejected. Because if you didn't have anybody applying, then you wouldn't be able to measure, okay, that resistance. So our job was to get people to go down. And it was dangerous for people to go down and attempt to register to vote in numbers because they would get reprisal. In other words, their bosses or some other people may get suspicious that they're part of this, you know, campaign, and they would get, you know, punished. Now, even though I was there to help people get registered to vote, I went and started continuing to gather information from the library, and then I went and talked to people. Oh, by the way, when I was doing the research in the library, it was in Tuskegee Institute. It's Tuskegee University now. But while I was in those files looking for information on the kind of incidents of violence and oppression that occurred in Dallas County, there was a fellow who was doing a book, and he was from New York, okay, a young Jewish fella, and he was in the same files, but he was looking for newspaper clippings, and he had this large camera, and he would take front page articles in the newspaper on the lynchings of black people. And he went back to New York and published a book, 100 Years of Lynching. That's the title of his book. We were in the same files. When he found something on Selma or Dallas County, he would give it to me, and I would give him anything on lynching that I found. And we were there all day, you know, so we got to be good friends. Research. There is no substitute for research. And that's why I like students, because I like to get them encouraged to go and don't come to any conclusions until you get some information. So I started interviewing people in Selma when I got there. Those were my techniques for organizing, asking questions. You'll be surprised how you can get people to come together when you ask questions. First of all, they have to get themselves together, all right? And some people have never asked themselves certain questions. And likely they wouldn't. But if someone else asks them the questions, then they begin to think about, okay, some things they hadn't thought about before. It happens every time. So what I did was start interviewing people. I said, well, what do you think is the most devastating problem here in your community? The biggest problem that you know, would say that affect people in this community? And I got a number of answers, okay? Like, you know, one guy said to me, well, the biggest problem here is that we don't have electricity in the black community. Now, this was back in 62, 63, when I started. That's when I went into Selma in 62, okay? After the Freedom Rides of 61, I went back there in 62. I was assigned. There were, where the black community in some places, they didn't have electricity. They were actually, students were studying their lessons using oil lamps, as we say, kerosene lamps. You know who used to use kerosene lamps? Abraham Lincoln. That's how much progress we had made, okay? He said we had they didn't have any television. Now, televisions were out in 63 and 62. But some people in those areas didn't have televisions. They didn't have electric irons because they didn't have any electricity. They used coal irons, pot of coal, and put the iron on top. And that's how they iron their clothes. No radio except battery. Now, this is the kind of condition that people lived in. And they said, well, this is our big problem right here. We need some electricity. Another one said, our biggest problem is that we don't have paved roads. Number of dirt roads out here, all right? And we're in the city limits with dirt roads. You know, my white shoes. You know, women said, you know, had to walk, you know, in the mud and everything. When they get muddy, you splashed on and everything, you know. Not deliberately, but you got holes, you know, and water holes and all that kind of stuff in there. So they said, we need paved roads. Those say schools. We know that they don't put any money in our schools. They're talking about separate but equal and all that, you know, and this is Supreme Court decision of 54 didn't affect them at all. Stone segregated schools and poor conditions and everything else. And one of the reasons they said that the white folks were so mean is because the process for getting your schools desegregated was that you would sign a petition. You had to have a minimum of 10 names on a petition, and you present it before the school board. If they rejected it, you appealed directly to federal court. Or if they ignored you, you go to federal court within a certain period of time. That happened in Selma. You know what happened? Less than 3 weeks, only one name was left. People went and took their name off. That's kind of repression that they, you know, experienced. Even when people stood up. That's why they were saying that Selma, they were so mean. And And there are a lot of other incidents, okay? But the main thing is, in organizing, I went and started getting people thinking about these things. And my response was to follow up with another question. You don't get your road, well, who decides on which roads get paved? Okay? How did they get in that position? Okay? They were appointed by, who was they appointed by? Okay? Okay? In other words, they decided on how their money is going to be spent. Whose money is that? Oh, tax money? Okay, so how did they get in that position in the first place? Oh, they were elected. They were elected. Who elected them? Did you participate in that? Well, no, Schools, roads, electricity, that's all decided by people who are elected. And why do you think they're elected? They're supposed to represent you. So you're unrepresented. That's why you don't have any roads. That's why you don't have any lights. So maybe you need to get represented. All right? So my point is, all lines led right back to the right to vote. So then you don't have to argue with people about why you need to register to vote. The things that they say they were concerned about. I didn't tell them what to be concerned about. The effective organizing is how you bring people to conclusions that relate to their interests. That's the first step. The next step is to get them to recognize that there are other people who feel the same way. The next step is to get them to come together, okay, and share their discontent. That's what mass meetings are for. It's for people to come together and, okay, say, I'm concerned about this also. That's when you get the masses going, see. You cannot accomplish any goal or change unless you're able to get the majority, okay, of people either participating with you or sympathetic and supporting you.
Well, that's it for today. We were only able to show you a small segment of the interview of Dr. Bernard Lafayette, but to view more, please go to our website at www.arkingdream.org, and you can view it in its entirety.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. I have a